Born from Eastern European roots, this lovely lady was handed a violin by her dear father, a violinist, at the tender age of 4, before discovering the piano and singing, and then the flute. And from that position, with a lot of practical wisdom, she set upon her journey, where she is today now the coveted instructor of flute at the renowned Juilliard School of Music, as well as SUNY Stony Brook in Long Island. An interview with Carol Wincenc, lucid, transparent, filled with tremendous takeaways. This seminal lady of the flute shares her life story with us next. But first, an excerpt of Flute Sonata No. 9, the Manhattan Sonata, especially written for Carol Wincenc, live in concert at the Cole Conservatory of Music. Carol, welcome to the Tutti Flute Academy. It's such a privilege having you here, and I'm so looking forward to our time together. My first question always starts out with those childhood memories that often show remarkable stability over many, many years, and I think all of us are very interested in how you became interested in music. Let's start with childhood.
I had a very special upbringing, and probably in utero, as my father was a violinist and symphony conductor and my mother a pianist. And so I was born into a family with 2 older sisters who already had become musicians and singing and playing the piano. And for me, anything that involved the arts was of such utter attraction, but I think something to do with the sonic quality of hearing instruments in the household all the time was the greatest impact. And also my father, who was my first teacher when I was 4 with the violin.
So here you are involved in this wonderful atmosphere of music as a violinist, as a pianist, as a singer. How did you come by the flute, or did the flute come by you?
I think that probably I discovered the flute, and it also came to me because my father was the guest at many summer music festivals. There was a camp in New York State that was called Tally Ho, and one of the older gals, who was probably a babysitter for me, was a flute player, and I think that that may have planted the seed. But the initial passion really was because I wanted to play in the band, and our public school in Williamsville, New York, which is a suburb of Buffalo, had a wonderful band program, absolutely outstanding, and we started in group lessons. But I had displayed such a talent right away from the beginning that my band teacher went to my parents and said, Carol's going to need private lessons as soon as possible. And then that just started the unfolding of playing the flute.
Carol, you already explained some of the instruments that you performed, you know, in this rich atmosphere and upbringing that you had. Were there other instruments as well?
Well, certainly the voice. We all sang, all of us. We sang around the table, we sang at parties, we sang at gatherings, we sang at camp. And we also were able to imitate very well, both my sisters and myself. We could hear something, identify it, and be able to repeat it back. So vocalizing was very, very important as part of our family explorations, and also being able to play in ensembles. So it was a mix of, yes, the early string experience with the bow and the control of the bow, but the vocal experience, and then playing in bands, for example, and very soon in orchestra. I was playing in orchestra ever since I was 11 or 12, and that amazing texture of a symphony orchestra. Of course, we were at every rehearsal and concert of my father's orchestra, so the larger sonic environment was so thrilling to me. But I was also in a drama group, and I was preparing for plays ever since I was 9, and that theater group also did tremendous study of body movement. And I was a dancer. I was a ballerina ever since I was 7 until I was 14, up to 5 classes a week. So all these influences of dance, movement, vocalizing, playing an instrument, being in an orchestra, being in a band. Let's see, what else could I throw in there? I mean, I did love the great out of doors and was a swimmer ever since I was a little girl. So I think body, voice, instrument, what it started to instill in me was a trust that this is the instrument. And so when I was in contact with the Alexander technique as a mature woman at age 23, 24, it all seemed to fold together.
You know, Cal, we already touched upon athleticism like swimming and how much that helps spirit your sound through your instrument. Regarding singing, how much has singing helped shape and develop the sound you are so well known for?
Well, there's no question, because what I love about the voice, and I did not formally study or take voice lessons. I sang in choruses. I sang in the Coro Accademia Filarmonico Romano in Italy when I was studying flute there, and we toured all over. And then when I went to Oberlin, I was in the Oberlin College Choir, and that was monumental. We had to memorize all our music. I think that the sound production through a reed in the voice box was something that was so organic and that I could sense very viscerally all the time. In other words, the friction of the reed. So I likened it to the bow, the friction against the bow, of the bow against the string. So it was very interesting that I would pick the flute, because all we have is a hole and we have nothing to really blow against. So I probably didn't make any, I didn't distinguish that was any different necessarily. And so I think that sort of ample application of air was something that just felt like that's what you do. And I didn't think about the fact that it was just a hole with no reed or mouthpiece. And as a result, I always had that very thorough, vocalized approach to playing the flute.
Let's talk about high school and those memories you have that helped shape and dedicate your willfulness to becoming a professional musician.
Probably my greatest first impression and mentor was my father, who was very thorough about how to produce a sound with beauty and consistency, and also how to practice. So how to unravel a technical passage. What are the creative ways that could be approached? But then the flute-specific influences were Edna Camarchero, who had studied with Marcel Moïse, but I was 9 years old, and this was in the early 60s, end of the 50s, 60s. I also had Robert Moles and Anton Wolf. These were Buffalo flutists. And then in the summer times, I had Charles Delaney and James Pellerite and Mr. Tipton, Albert Tipton at Aspen. And throughout the year, once I got to college, I had Robert Willoughby at Oberlin and Severino Gazzoloni before Oberlin in Rome, and the Chigiana in Siena. And that was quite something. That sparked this wildly rich, animated way of playing, and also communication with the audience. That's something that I've been so feverishly yearning for in every student, is that, you know, instead of saying an accurate time was had by all at the concert, we can then find from a young artist a way of communicating and having personal flourish, shall we say. So I learned that from people like Gazzoloni. And then finally, my first professional appointment was with the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra, and Jean-Pierre Rampal came every single season, and I was his personal escort. I played with him all the time. And from that, it was like, wow, I'm going back to the French style of flute playing. And then I met Mr. Moïse, Marcel Moïse, and knew him over the last 20 years of his life.
Let's now shift to formal training. You had mentioned Oberlin. Were there other schools as well?
Well, prior to Oberlin was my first taste of a serious music conservatory, and that was Santa Cecilia Music Conservatory in Rome, where we had enough time to practice all day if we wanted to. We always met in a group class, a group master class situation. There weren't private lessons one-on-one. We could always hear the other players. We could always see the teacher guiding each player in a unique way. So that would have been my senior year of high school, and I graduated from high school early. Then I went to Oberlin because I came from an Oberlin legacy family, and my parents were happy knowing that I was going to be on a campus with a curfew in a dormitory, unlike it was in Rome. And those 2 years with Mr. Willoughby and all my woodwind quintet coaches were invaluable. And then I transferred to Manhattan School of Music, and I had Harold Bennett. And Mr. Bennett was about the accuracy, the intonation, the perfection of placement of the sound. He had a magnificent way of playing and being with the instrument, which was very different from the French school, but that kind of American wind playing, and also from all his years playing the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra, that kind of on the dime, like a figure skater, you know, you had to be able to place the sound just perfectly. Then I went for my master's degree after my bachelor's, and I was at the Juilliard School, and my private teacher was Arthur Laura, who had played with Toscanini in the NBC Symphony, and my chamber coach was Samuel Barron. So I had this tremendous intellect of Mr. Barron, who imparted such understanding about form and architecture in a piece, but really how we can gain, you know, conceptualize the form of a piece based on really understanding and analyzing the architecture I mentioned. And so all these ingredients then prepared me for the big blast, which was Marcel Moïse, who came from a tremendous tradition of the Paris Conservatoire, where all the solfège, all the intimacy on every single note, and the kind of nuancing that really at that point in my life, in my young 20s, just hit home tremendously.
So here we are, graduation day. What were the choices that you had? Which ones did you make that ultimately led you to becoming a professional musician?
I have to say, and credit my father for this, who grew up in an Eastern European background, that he instilled in all the daughters that we must have gainful employment, that we must be able to stand on our own 2 feet and be able to exist in the world financially, and to save all our money, and for having that option and having that guarantee to always have some security that way. So my savvy was that I had to get a job. I had to. That was what my father expected, and so I started taking auditions. Now, back in the old days, in the early 70s, there were of course orchestral openings, but the great fortuitousness of the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra being one of those openings that year, my graduation year with my master's, when that appeared, I said, I'm going for that. And a lot of people said, oh no, you should play in a big symphony orchestra. And I had played in summer festivals in very large orchestras, and I adored the repertoire, I adored it. But something said, go take that audition. And I won it. And I tell you, it was the best thing that ever molded me for the life that I have now. Because the orchestra was only 24 in personnel. I was the sole flute player, and I had remarkable opportunities to play as a soloist. I played all over the Soviet Union, all over Eastern Europe. Our maestro was Dennis Russell Davies, who couldn't have been more exploratory in the kind of repertoire that we played. We played everything from Stravinsky and Copland, and we had guests. Our guests were routinely Mr. Copland. I got to play the Copland duo with Mr. Copland. We had Messiaen. We had people like Philip Glass and Steve Reich. We had so many wonderful opportunities for repertoire that was not the standard symphonic repertoire per se, and also it was wonderful to be showcased as a soloist. So I think I got that gainful employment, the retirement plan started, the medical plan was in place. I felt like I could breathe and really function well, knowing that. So I saved my money for 5 years, and then I heard that the Naumburg Foundation was having its very first ever solo flute competition, and I entered it. Now, a lot of people said, are you crazy? You already have this wonderful reputation, you're solidly planted, you've been playing at Marlborough, people know who you are. Why would you risk that? And there was a voice in me that said, I really want to do this, and I will do it with my 150,000%. And that's what I did. I took a leave of absence from the orchestra, and that's all I did that year, was to prepare for the Naumburg competition, in which I won in April of that year. That was 1978.
And that is some great advice for young flutists. Notice that, Carol, you did not make that decision to train for the Nuremberg, even though that was the first year, but you had several years and you saved your money diligently so that when you did take this leave of absence, you were able to concentrate and focus. And I applaud you for that. And probably your Eastern European father and sensibilities of your mother helped raise a young child to be that way, which is great. Great kudo. Let's talk about you are so well known for your melodious cantabile style and highly recognizable sonority. What do you attribute to that?
Again, I really feel the roots were in the timbre of the violin, which, how do you describe the timbre of a violin? It's penetrating, it's like a beautiful soprano singing, it has focus, it has core, and it has depth in the sound. And without knowing it, that's what I was copycatting in my father's beautiful sound. He had a gorgeous Testori violin. He played with a tremendous amount of richness, the flavor of the vibrato. You know, on the violin, you have open strings and you can vibrate. So this combination of non-vibrato, vibrato, spinning vibrato, how do I say, shimmer in the sound, and that was my first sound example, and I wanted to copy that in every way, unconsciously. I didn't realize that. Then blend in the vocal approach, which has a kind of freedom. You're not limited by holding a physical instrument, but it's deeply within you. So I would say that cantabile style is a mix of hearing the singing quality of both the human voice and the violin, and that really excited me to want to do that on the instrument. I think also probably the greatest compliment I receive is, we never saw you take a breath. How did you do that? We never saw you breathe the whole concert. Now, of course, I'm breathing. Of course I am. But I think that this, trying to eliminate this as the focus of everything I'm doing and really putting it more into what is this doing as a medium, as channeling, a sound, a timbre, a sonority. And of course, I always say, to all my students, there's nothing more deathly boring than a flute sound that has no wonderful, wild, subtle color changes. And I think we have to do that, and that's a whole string of techniques, from what's the shape inside the mouth, where's the tongue, where's the throat, what is the how do I say, what is the sound color that we're really trying to get here, and really going to extremes to find that.
Carol, would you give us an example?
Yes, I think if we look at the passage, is it forte, is it pianissimo? And what are we doing with the jaw? Where are we with the use of both the upper lip and the bottom lip? It's not a passive thing, this upper lip. In fact, the numbers of muscles that are engaged all the time in this area. So if you think of a young player in a band, they're like, okay, now that's an extreme, but it's true. That's a similar kind of sound that you'll hear from a beginner player. So how do we get from that And what I'm doing, I'm always saying to my students, work it, like the Jane Fonda workout, work it. I'm really shaping each one, and I do have to attribute Mr. Moïse's books, the 24 little melodious studies with variations, and he has you going from pianissimo to fortissimo within a matter of seconds. And how are you going to do that? So there's all kinds of exercises that you can do, which from the very, very beginning of flute playing, can I go from pianissimo to fortissimo, you know, over 8 beats. And those are all those exercises in Moïse's de la sonorité. And this urgency to be able to make those contrasts. And I'm doing that by really sensing how much of the aperture is open, how much of my jaw is being involved as I'm going into the upper octave or dropping down. What's the shape inside my mouth? Do I want an ah, or do I want an oo, or do I want an These are all syllables, right? So that's kind of a ah, ooh, right? But if I'm playing something like Nielsen concerto, right? That's kind of an oh, ah, oh, you know. So these are all things that play and factor into the extreme coloration that is required, in my opinion.
What's mysterious about all this?
What's really mysterious about all this is that it's invisible. We can't crawl inside. I mean, cameras there have been all kinds of medical studies, but you know, you can see a bow going across the string. You can see a horn player's, you know, you can see quite visibly the way the mouth is moving around a mouthpiece. You can see it also when you play the flute. You can see the use of muscles and how we taper the note. But that invisibility is the very challenge that is going to excite, you know, an imaginative young person to say, well, how am I going to get that? How do I do that? How do I do that? And of course, it matters who you pick as a teacher. You have to really select someone whose sound you love, and you know, whose philosophies and whose approach is something that's akin to you. So you have to know what you want to sound like.
Carol, you left us in this dramatic moment chronicled in your life when you won the Naumburg competition. Let's go back and trace the steps from that to how you became the flute professor at Juilliard, if you don't mind.
Many of our services with the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra were educational outreach. Many, many, many. I can tell you all the blizzards I drove through, you know, downpours, everything, you know, life-threatening voyages to get to schools. And our woodwind quintet, we had the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra woodwind quintet, and that's where I learned on the job. And I have to really thank my wonderful colleague Richard Kilmer, the renowned legendary oboe professor at Eastman School of Music and was at Yale as well. And how to go in front of a group of 300 kindergartners and be able to stimulate them and keep the attention, boy did I learn. And I was just 22 years old, and I also started first teaching at that age. So I think having to be in the hot fire right away as a young girl. Now, as a child, my father, we went to nursing homes and played in places, retirement homes, all the time. So there was an element of giving music, giving back to the community, and it's something I did ever since I was little. But it's another thing to really bring an educational environment to a group of a lot of young people and pick the right repertoire and how you're going to segue from one piece to the next and keep a thread going and challenging their thinking. So I think that having had that service that I did in the community and in front of all kinds of audiences. I mean, I was an affiliate artist. I had to play in Pontiac showrooms. I had to play for the Kiwanis Club. I had to play for convents, and I had to play for very ill children. You know, you not only develop a tremendous amount of compassion and empathy, but also what is this extraordinary magic that music is able to convey and communicate to people and bring them some peace and sense of collecting themselves within. And so that fed me as much, you know, as I think it fed the others too. So I could see the teacher in me was evolving, and I was very, very comfortable with that, and I wanted that. I wanted that exchange, that kind of, how do I say, like a meal. You're serving something, you see how people enjoy it or raise their eyebrows of like, what does that taste? And I think every student is like another dish appearing, like at a great Korean feast. You know, they always have these amazing, one more different vegetable, one different spice here, this sort of thing. And the student, every student is unique. And I have a bit of, how should I say, I think there's a gift inside me that knows what that student needs, or maybe what are their insecurities, so I can really work with that as much as perfecting, you know, their agility on the instrument, or how you work on a passage, or what kind of sonority are you developing, but also the inner confidence of the student. And so it was a match made in heaven. And when I was invited to join the Juilliard faculty. There was no audition. I had already built a reputation. I'd been a full professor at Indiana University. I was teaching at Rice University. I was out there in the trenches doing, you know, community work. I was playing full blast as a soloist, chamber music. I was a good pick for that school, and it's been very interesting because most of the students that walk in, if not all, are virtuosos. But where is that next layer that needs to be peeled back? They're asking themselves the same question. What do I want to do with this craft? Where am I going with this? So it's wonderful to revisit my own personal voyage, be able to guide them through the choices that I made. And so where I am now suits me very well at Juilliard, because we have the student who is only wanting to be the soloist and the superstar, and then you have others now who are very interested in entrepreneurship and educational ways, you know, to become teachers. So it's a very exciting institution, specifically the Juilliard, and also Stony Brook University, where I teach. It's a very different kind of school.
Carol, how do you put your personal signature into interpreting a piece of music?
First of all, I look at what am I playing? What century am I playing? What are the influences at that time? What's happening in art history? I loved art history. That was my favorite subject at Oberlin. And I, of course, lived in Italy, so I was looking at art history. And of course, I had an actor's approach as well. As part of dramatic training, before you go out on stage, you have to be with your character for a good 45 minutes as you sit in your dressing room. I used to do it in the wings where it was very dark while people were, you know, getting all the sets ready and this sort of thing. And I would just sit there and I'd go into my character. And I think that because we have no words in our music, in classical music, we're reinterpreting. We're bringing life to something that has been composed by a composer. I'm not a composer. I do love the little bit of improvisation that I've done, and I want to do more because my son is a rock musician, and I would look at him and I see how he improvises in the songs that he's writing, and I have such admiration for that. And jazz artists, oh my God. But I think that the story that has to be told, I don't consciously give my pieces words or this or that, but I think because I've played so much music, I really am very fascinated by the architecture of a piece. For some pieces it's very clear. If you're playing Mozart, you have a way that he starts in the home key and he ventures from the key, he wanders from home, and he'll bring you back home. Bach does that too. And what is that? What is that about understanding that, for one thing? Or take a romantic composer and how they'll go into a whole nother key and a voyage and bring in another theme. So I think this way of trying to communicate with being very informed, very informed. And how do you get informed? You get informed by listening to all kinds of music. Go to the opera, you know, see how an opera develops. What is the composer doing to create the climax of the opera? What's happening with all the other characters adding their parts and their voices to it? You know, so much of our music is sheer dialogue, you know, it's a conversation of themes and or micro moments in music. So I love that, putting the pieces of the puzzle together. And I think my own personal flourish, yes, I had learned from a very early age of how to communicate. My father always said, if you don't enjoy what you're doing, no one else will. And then the other thing that I always carry with me is he used to say, you must kiss your audience. And I love that too, because that's a way of feeling the exchange. You're up there alone on stage, or thankfully with a chamber group or an orchestra or whatever, and you have this wonderful opportunity to project beyond who you are right then and there, concentrating, making sure your fingers are in the right place. But you have this way of singing out what needs to be sung and just letting it go out there and mingle with the imagination of the audience.
Well, what is the advantage of making music at all, especially together?
Well, that's quite a question. It's a challenging question, but I think for me, I know I'm at my happiest when I'm making music with others. It's just part of who I am, and the exchange, the interaction. Why make music at all? Well, the beauty of it is that it's immediately assimilable. I think sound is something that, it has no boundaries, and it can ignite the imagination and help people in that way because it's so simple. It's physics. We're hearing a sound being produced, and then organized sound or disorganized sound, and the act of making music is something that's so empowering. You've reached a certain, you've obtained a level of technical proficiency, and that it has given endless joy to so many people, whether amateurs or professionals.
Curious, do you prefer to play in a large hall or a small hall, and why?
Well, that could be answered in two parts, because the early part of my career was only in very, very big halls, not exclusively, but I was doing a lot of concertos. I have this exceptional list of things that were created for me: Christopher Rouse, Lucas Foss, Joan Tower, Henryk Górecki, Roberto Sierra, Michael Torki. It goes on and on, the list of these magnificent works that were written for me and that I was able to premiere. that required a large symphony orchestra and a big hall. I find now that in this wonderful phase of life that I'm in, that I do prefer a smaller hall, a more chamber music setting, something about the intimacy that feeds me tremendously. So it really depends. I mean, do I get excited when I go see something in a big hall? Oh yes, I mean, there's no question about it. But I do love, and it probably comes back to the flute is certainly audible because it's the very top tessitura of the orchestra, but in essence it does not have as big a sound as other instruments, and I love being able to make music in small spaces, so I think I like the small ones now.
I'm curious if your father's influence has shaped this answer, but what is your favorite combination of instruments to play with?
I have to say, I do love the stringed instruments, probably because the Budapest String Quartet and my father's string quartets were always in our home, and I heard that sonority, the 4 instruments that are matched, 2 violins, viola, cello in timbre, and it has a kind of, I don't know how to say it, you know, when you look at a field of cows that are variated by black and white, somehow they all match and blend together. I just love that the sonority of the 4 instruments is so beautifully blended, and I think that flute with string quartet is probably my most favorite medium. Not exclusively, but I do love it, and that's why I've had a lot of pieces written for that. Joan Tower, now the new Uebayashi, which is coming out. Mozart, of course, the wonderful recording I made with the Emerson Quartet of the Mozart quartets. And the list goes on and on. I also have to say I love my trio. That's flute, viola, harp. I think flute and harp and flute and guitar are a kiss. I think this works extremely well, so I have great fondness, and I also have a course at Juilliard which is chamber music for winds, guitar, harp, and strings too, but certainly the guitar, harp. And I'm a member of the New York Woodwind Quintet, and I love my colleagues because they are my teachers. That's flute, oboe, clarinet, bassoon, horn, the New York Woodwind Quintet. We're in our 70th anniversary year, and they teach me so much. It's really, it's stunning. I just love it.
Now you have a relatively new publication of the G Major Mozart Flute Concerto. Why don't you tell us about it?
We are about to play the first movement of the G Major Mozart Concerto, which is the authentically flute concerto.
And who is that handsome man holding a violin to your left?
This is my wonderful, wonderful dear friend and colleague, Robert Davidovich, who we were Juilliard comrades, and here we are in Los Angeles, and he invited me to be on his beautiful chamber music series. And he just happened to be in the right place at the right time so that we could demonstrate the Mozart Concerto with just two players. So I'm playing, my part has the solo flute line, but also orchestra tutti parts, and you are playing the orchestra tutti as well.
Okay.
what I love about it is that I think this could be played with an oboist, certainly a violinist, another flutist.
I know what you're trying to say. I'll tell you what you're trying to say. Shall I tell you? That musicians get together and with whatever instrumentation is available, they'll make music no matter what. And composers take to that and they say, yeah, play it for that instrumentation. And Bach changed.
Yes.
Different circumstance, but he used the Vivaldi 4 harpsichord concerto into 3 piano concerto and all kinds of other permutations. So, yeah. So I was a flute now.
Yes.
And an orchestra.
A wonderful flute and a wonderful orchestra. And, I've been talking about how the sonority of the violin is at the very core of everything I love to do on the flute or try to do on the flute. So I just love it for flute and violin, yeah.
Oh yeah, the Bach trio sonatas, 2 flutes, and then the violin flute, which can be done in all kinds of ways.
Absolutely.
And I like the way you added this is the original, authentic flute, not oboe.
Yeah, right, exactly. Beauty of this is that every single note on this page is Mozart's, because in some of the piano reductions, they fabricated some things. It's very interesting, but this is absolutely comes out of the score, the orchestral score. And it can be used with old instruments. It can work on traditional historical performance instruments. And I didn't over-edit it. It's pretty easy to read, don't you think, Robert?
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's very straight ahead. And mostly flute players say, wow, I didn't know that was happening in the accompaniment, so it gives them that perspective as well.
So interested in the answer to this question. What is the future of chamber music?
Now that is a very important question, and I think what I'm seeing and beholding is that it will never vanish. Impossible. There's something about the live product that cannot be replicated in any way, shape, or form. To be in the presence, maybe it's an aura that's emitted, certainly vibrations like a stone in a pool, has ripples. But what I think might be evolving is because large symphony orchestras, of course, they're very difficult to maintain economically, but each symphony orchestra has a rich educational program that comes with their symphonic traditions, and petting zoos, children that can come up and try the instruments and have an experiential exchange with the instruments and the musicians. And perhaps what we're seeing is that the choice of venue is what is so variable and variated and wonderful. We're seeing clubs, nightclubs, or gathering places where there's food and drink involved, or certainly relaxed conversation around the music. For example, the concert we did this morning at the Broad Stage is an audience participation. We explain what the pieces are, but then there's a whole Q&A afterwards. And the audience feels like they're really part of the experience. They love it. And I think maybe that's the direction we're going, but in terms of live music, I just don't think it's ever going to disappear. I think it's impossible. I mean, people need to express themselves. They want to do it in real time and in a very real way. So,
Carol, it seems to me there's an endless amount of flute graduates today. Less and less jobs. We've kind of spoken a little bit about this. What is your advice to young flutists today who are considering making flute performance a profession?
That is a specific tightrope to walk, and I say that with optimism, but also a warning. You have to know what you want and the degree to which you want it and how much it matters to you. It's because it is a walk that's very specific. It requires having the time, but I mean focused time, so that you can really cultivate the ability to listen and to hear what you're doing. That is a must. You will have done all your technical studies. ad nauseum, over and over and over again, to build that kind of confidence that you have to have under pressure. And then you have the artistic paintbrush of all this that will ignite your abilities to communicate with the audience through your charisma, your particular flourish, the way you are so touched by the music. So you've got that serious time spent, and I mean time spent alone in a very constructive, conscious way. There are hours and hours of practicing one can do, but if you're not listening, and if you're not really observing why the passage is not clean, then just don't take the time. I mean, just don't do it. You know, find something that really is your bliss. I mean, you gotta say, you know, why are you doing this? I mean, why is it calling you? Why do you want to engage in it? And just know that that's the price you have to pay. There is no free lunch. You've got to have your act together. And you also have to create the experience of playing in front of other people. It's not enough just to be in the privacy of your practice room or in the privacy of your lesson. You have to get out in front of people and have that experience of what your own awareness and your mindfulness while there are people there beholding what you're doing. That's a very, very important part of all this. Competitions. You must enter competitions. You must never give up. You've got to stay in the game. You've got to be in your A game. I always say to my students, if you're going into a competition, there's no way you can lose. It's impossible because you have perfected your A game. You are in that game. You have peeled back every single layer. You have gotten up in front of people 100 times to play for them. You're going to walk out there with a product that has evolved over time. This is not a last-minute endeavor. When I see that I took 9-10 months to prepare for the Naumburg, that's all I did. I had the luxury. I saved my money. I was in the orchestra and I took a leave of absence, so I had that kind of time, and I took it with utter seriousness. But there was no way I could lose, in a sense, because I was in my A game. And when you're in your A game, it is a kind of euphoria I can't even begin to describe. Your tonguing is deft and agile. Your fingers have gone through all the passage work. Yes, there's the human element to all this, and things can happen. But a jury will always know a great artist, somebody who's transcended, you know, and has gone to a level where, what if there's a derailment? You just keep going because the music is providing this blanket of inspiration. And so that's a very serious endeavor to go into music professionally these days. Now, that said, we didn't have the internet, and we didn't have this remarkable community that exists through the internet, how you can sell yourself, how you can brand, how you can market yourself, how you can create an audience. It's really absolutely astounding. And that's why I thank you, Christopher, because you are bringing this to everyone who has the, you know, the opportunity to see it. I mean, it's really quite something. And for that reason, we are a blended community. We really are bonded that way through the visual impression, the oral impression, this level of expertise. When I see the students coming in to audition at the Juilliard School, I mean, the level, it just keeps climbing and soaring and soaring and soaring of technical expertise. Now, where is the match that's lit and the flame that goes up with fire, you know, with excitement? That's the key thing to work towards, and have a fantastic coach like a sports coach. I mean, you wouldn't enter an Olympic event without endless months of training. So I invite people who have that gift, you know, to take it all the way, because there's so much that's given in return.
Carol, your seminal wisdom, your graciousness, your experience, the wisdom that you've gathered over the years of performing, you're in the middle of your career looking forward. We're just so fortunate to have you on this interview, and we thank you, I think, on behalf of our online audience today, who maybe from poor countries who could not even dream of going to a Juilliard, but have incredible gifts God bless you for giving us this time to allow people to be exposed to someone of your stature, an estimable career. So God bless you, and thanks again.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure for me. Thank you so much.
Register today at ChristopherCaliendo.com and get 2 world music publications for the price of 1. That's right, select from our diverse catalog of world music: Tango Americano, Gypsy Americano, Flamenco Americano, Chamber Jazz, Western, film, sacred, and classical jazz. Enjoy hundreds of performances from our YouTube channel to make your selection process easier. Register here, simply add your name and email, and enjoy our 2-for-1 forever sale from our entire catalog. Thank you to you for 25 years of Caliendo World Music.